There is no coming back from this. Former Democrat insider Lindy Li has finally told the full story of who really controlled the Biden White House, and this time she's even taken names. There's also some damning details that have come out recently that I believe ties perfectly into these bombshell revelations, so please take a look at this exchange before I give you the full picture.
What I will say is people were kept in the dark about the timing of the announcement, including the highest echelons of the United States government. For example, Anita Dunn, whom I worked in close concert with, had no idea. She did a conference call that morning telling people that we would stay the course, that they would stay the course. And so she had only like a minute heads up that the announcement was coming. And I can't stress enough how high up Anita Dunn was. She was basically part of the council of presidents. Dave, we didn't have a president in the
Right.
We had a council of these unelected people that you've never even heard of. And they're Anita Dunn, Mike Donnellan, and Steve Ricchetti. 3 of them were running the country. Most Americans, I would say maybe like 1%, if that, have heard of them.
Wow, so 2 things jumped out at me. First is this is the first time we've heard actual names and faces for who was really pulling the strings of a puppet presidency from someone like Lindy. And secondly, this wasn't even the deepest of the deep state figures because even they hadn't known that Biden was about to step out of the race. By the way, we're having some of the most important conversations of our time here, so be sure to subscribe to Millionaire Mentor to always be the first to see them. Now, the question is, how far did the rabbit hole really go? Well, as it turns out, insiders and journalists like Lindy Li as well as Chris Whipple, who came out with a whole book recently, paint a picture that the groups that actually ran the country on behalf of the president and those that made the biggest decisions on his behalf were not the same group of people, and that sounds like a damning indictment of a presidency whose threads are coming undone by every new revelation, especially now that more people are willing to speak up.
But were you hearing grumblings about how it was going to go down or when it was going to go down? Or were there different factions in the White House that, it sort of seemed like, okay, maybe Joe didn't know exactly what to do or wasn't aware, but Jill kind of wanted him to stay versus some of the people that just wanted him to just get into the office of the presidency so then he could step down because people kind of thought Kamala was no good. Like what level or what did you see in all of that?
Dave, you're right over target. I will adjust what you said, though. Jill didn't kind of want him to stay. Jill desperately wanted him to stay. And please bear in mind that during this time, Biden had COVID. And Hunter was basically sitting in on White House meetings, high-level meetings that required security clearances. This guy is honestly, I'm not even entirely sure if he's a recovering drug addict.
They did find cocaine at the White House in an area that he was one of the few people that was in. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's undeniable that he peddled his influence to enrich himself and the big guy, quote unquote. So this is a guy sitting in the Oval Office, listening in on top-level White House meetings throughout this time, throughout the month of July. And I know because my friends are senior aides, and, to like Steve Ricchetti and Nina Dunn. So Biden was like incapacitated this entire time because he was really sick. And remember that a few days before, Trump suffered the assassination attempt. So people were freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
They rightly thought that the election was over. How do you beat a guy like that? And the way that he handled that with such self-possession, I would have been freaking out. I would have been hysterical on stage.
It was incredible watching him, that moment of composure and everything else. Yeah.
Right. I mentioned that because Democrats were in complete disarray, would be putting it mildly.
Honestly, nothing grates on me more than the idea that Jill and Hunter Biden had latched onto the president's leaking powers, and there were even reports back in July that senior White House officials were quite struck to find Hunter Biden at the chair during important meetings, despite the fact that he held absolutely no authority or clearance to even be inside these sensitive rooms of power. And then, of course, you saw Jill Biden posting photos of herself on the president's chair, on Air Force One, going through important paperwork with the caption, "Prepping for the G7." It's all now starting to fall into place as more and more people speak out, allegedly.
There was no money coming in, other than the monthly recurring ActBlue donations that they trick you into giving, obviously. But this is not an exaggeration. There was no money coming in after the debate. Zero.
Right.
There were staffers who I would just be shooting the shit with on the sofa because they had nothing to do. And we would just be commiserating. because everybody lost faith. So Biden kind of markets his decision as an act of patriotism. It wasn't. There was no money coming in. So there was no way he would have continued. There's just no way.
Do you have any, putting the money part aside, and everyone knows he was having huge fundraisers with George Clooney and Obama not too long before the debate. But putting the money part aside, do you have any insider info as to what the day or two before he stepped down was like? I mean, we keep hearing that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, basically got him behind closed doors. There's that other story about how they would hide him from people that were trying to get in. Mike Johnson told Barry Weiss that story about how for months they kept delaying meetings and it was just sort of becoming obvious. But do you have any insider stuff on those few days before?
Yeah.
Like, what was it like when they finally got him to do that, if Jill was really pushing him to keep going?
Yeah. And I want to say, I first hinted at this on the Sean Ryan show. And then suddenly that new book that's coming out, Fight. I hate even mentioning it. I don't want to give them free advertising. But they were repeating something that I already said 2 months ago, like it's some new intel.
Now, that wasn't just true of small-scale individual donors in the Democratic base, which hilariously people complained about still receiving campaign donation requests from the Democrats long after the election was over and the party had burned through over $1 billion. It was also the fact that it gave mega donors even more sway over key party decisions. Most prominently, which candidate would they pit against Donald Trump, especially when he looked stronger than ever after the failed assassination attempt? Of course, it was way too late either to go with a completely new candidate or to have an actual convention where the new candidate was selected through a bottom-up process fairly. And the party was stuck with Kamala Harris, which allegedly, even Barack Obama at first was hesitant to support. Now, there's no particular name that Lindy Li said next. James Clyburn, who I don't think many people have even heard of. He's actually a representative of my state of South Carolina, who Biden had a pretty high regard for and actually listened to on important policy matters. And that's how someone who said he was riding with Biden, eventually had to become the closest lever of control on Joe Biden to eventually get him out of the race.
So what's the connection between Clyburn and what most people seem to think, or at least the people who are talking about this, which that it was this Pelosi-Schumer game? What's the connection there?
Clyburn was a Biden loyalist to the last. I bring up the Clyburn thing is because he is a source of a lot of the DEI that came out of the Biden administration. He wielded tremendous power. The people who you're right in that Pelosi and actually Adam Schiff, another person who really wanted Biden out. They worked hand in hand. And honestly, I wanted Biden out. And I'm going to be honest with you. I texted Adam Schiff right before I went on Fox News Sunday, just like saying, here's a heads up. I'm going to ask that the president step down. Are you okay with that? At that time, I can't really, as a member of the party, you don't just freelance. Okay.
Right,
I had a duty to make sure that everyone on the team knew what I was doing.
So did Clyburn have something to do with ultimately pushing him out? In the most specific way I can possibly ask that.
Yes, in that he made his wishes known before Biden dropped out that he wanted Kamala Harris.
It's an absolute tangled mess that's getting more complicated every time more details come out. And you can only imagine the panic inside the inner Democrat circles while all of this shuffle actually took place in July. Perhaps we'll get Joe Biden's own perspective soon as well, because the White House has confirmed he's writing his own book about his career and how it ended. But let me know in the comments what you think about this, because there's no denying that it all ended up disastrously for the Democratic Party as a whole.